Welcome to another episode of Fool Me Twice, the Fool Me Twice podcast. And today, your hosts, Ashley and Sean, are going to be getting into a little bit of the history of propaganda in modern times. So, in this foundational text we're going to be covering today, we are going to be laying out the case for how some of the modern day propaganda came together and how it is manifesting in our day-to-day lives currently, and who are some of the power players in that. So without further ado, as we go on our journey, Sean is going to be presenting an in-depth look into the book that we're covering today, which is PR, A Social History of Spin. And please let us know if you have any questions or comments regarding this particular book. And as I had said, this is the first in our propaganda series. So we plan on going very deep into the topic of propaganda and how it's affecting our day to day lives and how it is used to create some of the mass behavioral changes that are often discussed in our circles. So without further ado, Sean, how are you today?
I'm doing good. I'm so glad you haven't gotten sick of me yet, and you still invite me to do this show with you. This is great.
Absolutely. I am very much looking forward to it. We have put in a lot of work as far as this particular book, and I'm excited to get into some of the some of the I don't know what's the word I'm looking for. Some of these details. There's a lot of good information here.
There is. It's really, really in depth. But as you said, this is really some foundational work. It won't be the only propaganda or public relations PR book that we cover, but it was top of the list. We will cover soon The Hidden Persuaders. We will cover soon In the Pay Prostitutes Embedded in the Pay of the CIA, which the book we're looking at today, as well as the two I just mentioned, are absolute favorites of mine. And they're a little bit more off the beaten path rather than Edward Bernays' propaganda book or something that everybody knows the title of. So this will be an ongoing series. It won't just be these three books. We'll be looking at plenty of propaganda and spin, if you will, throughout our propaganda series that will continue forever, I'm sure. But for the history, for the foundation of the modern era of propaganda, this book was the top of my list. And as we go through it, you'll see why. It is not a short book. So we're going to be breaking this into a couple pieces. We'll try to cover the first half of it in this show tonight. I'm damn well sure people will get a kick out of it. There's a lot of power players that we're going to mention that you have the freedom to go look into these people on your own. You can do your research, read their works, and see how influential they were to our daily lives today. And I don't want to spoil any surprises, but we will absolutely get to it. So let's do it. PR, a social history of spin. Now, PR and propaganda, we'll be using those terms interchangeably. Think of them as the same thing. The author purposely calls this PR, meaning public relations, but it's really a Bernaysian term for propaganda.
And one thing that I wanted to add before we get going is that I think that as people listen to this, they are going to notice a couple of things, many different things. But one of the big things that was jumping out at me is that there are people that are considered to be power players at this time, and their rhetoric is very, very similar. And maybe they have a different catchphrase, such as humans are hackable animals, but there is a lot of similarities from the rhetoric of the power players that we're discussing today to what you still see. And the other thing that I found very significant was the very elitist attitude. I do not prefer to call these people members of the elite. I call them members of the predator class, which is what I consider them to be. But there's no doubt that through, money and connections and placement, that they have had the ability to be very influential in the information that we're exposed to and how we're exposed to that. And w- we're going to get into what are the goals of the work that they did, and ultimately, it is manipulation of behavior. So,
It's a great point because in the future we'll cover some technocrats books and some eugenicists books and some international bankers books and some the word you don't like, the elite, some of the royals and their books from all around the world, and they're using the same exact phrases that the quote unquote elite class, the predator class in the field of propaganda and public relations are using. They are using the same terminology. I don't want to spoil it yet. We're going to dive into it.
okay, sounds good. I'm ready to rock at the helm of the PowerPoint.
Cool. All right. Let's go to, well, there is a very specific reason that we jumped to our propaganda series, because if you listen to our first episode, we had 15 topics that we wanted to continually look at and cover, and propaganda was on that list. So if you're thinking, why the hell are they doing it now? Well, it's because this week, the second week of June, is a very special week. It is the United Nations Behavioral Science Week for 2026. Doesn't that give you a warm and fuzzy feeling inside, Ashley? Don't you feel comforted that the UN is now meeting to talk about behavioral science, behavioral modeling, AI adoption into our everyday lives, human behavior and its manipulation? Don't you feel just grand?
I really do. And this is something that, of course, we always feel safe when we know that the UN, the United Nations, is working on something. But I definitely find it especially interesting in our modern times due to the integration of AI with artificial intelligence. So one of the things that we have known for a very long time is that data collection is honestly the it is a huge currency, actually, is the data that is collected on the average everyday person. And it it is just actually an exponential, um, or it's the information that they've been able to gather from us has grown exponentially. So before, in the times of some of the people that we're speaking about here, they knew what they were doing and they were using the behavioral sciences and social sciences and things like that, psychology, in order to manipulate. But this is an absolute game changer. So I do find it really concerning, actually, that the level of information collection has gotten to this point, and now we're integrating AI. Now, I'm not somebody who thinks that AI is completely infallible, but I do think that we can recognize that it's very good at uh, collating and organizing and going through data very quickly. And we don't know, we're not privy to the algorithm that they are using for this information that they're collecting and exactly everywhere that they're collecting it from. But we can be pretty sure that if we're doing anything online regarding our digital footprint, that information is being tracked and put into a database. And I believe that their ability to sort through that with the advent or the addition of AI is really going to be a game changer for them. And perhaps they're thinking the same thing.
I totally agree. We need to give a call to Sarah Connor so she can destroy Skynet. But good call. The track trace database of AI is terribly frightening. They're using the same behavioral modification tactics and PR propaganda tactics that they used 120, 130 years ago, but they're taking it to a new level with the track trace database society now, which we will absolutely be covering propaganda in the narrowed down present day. But for today, We're taking a blast into the past, another history lesson. I know you all love it so much. I'm sorry, but this is foundational, and I promise it's exciting. So,
And one quick thing that I wanted to add when I was looking at some of the reviews for this book, there was a critique that there's not a lot of mention as far as some of the intelligentsia involvement in manipulation of behavior. And I just wanted to make the point that we understand that this is something that we are looking into and discuss all the time. So that is going to be forthcoming, even though it is not explicitly discussed in this particular text. Obviously, that is a huge piece. The cryptocracy element is a huge piece of what we're seeing in today's day and time. But this particular author and this particular text does not really address that. But I do feel that it is kind of implied just simply based on who who these power players are, but that's something that is going to be you know fleshed out in the further that we go, or the further along that we go in our propaganda series. So I just wanted to say that yes, we know very, very well and very clearly about the involvement of intelligentsia in the desire to control human behavior. That does not get really covered in this book, but we're going to get to that.
yeah, this book is more of it ends shortly after World War II. So there's only so much intelligentsia. The author, whose primary focus is looking at public relations, looking at the role of publicists and how it affects our lives today. So he's not looking at intelligentsia. He's not looking at secret societies, even though it is kind of obvious that they are working with and learning from each other, these secret organizations or these intelligence groups or these militaries with the public relations crowd. We will be covering the CIA's hiring of the press embedded in the pay of the CIA, which does cover the last 50 years of time or so with all of the brand name journalists out there that have secret lives working for intelligence agencies, and not just the CIA, but all over the place, as well as journalists from other countries that are working for the CIA. Journalists get great press passes. They can come and go as they please from other countries. So that is exactly who an intelligence agency would like to have on their payroll.
Yes, and one quick thing, I do think that one of the topics we're discussing in today's show does lay the groundwork very, very well about how that influence was, kind of discovered and then began being utilized. And there's so many tie-ins with this stuff that we see pre-internet times to how it is used in our modern day. And I think that it is like Sean was saying, we're going to get into that at a later time, but there is a lot here that you can see the beginnings of where this is coming together or how it could be utilized by intelligentsia and mass media. So, very important work that we're going to get into today. So, Sean, go ahead and let's get into this book.
Let's do it. Let me tell you a little something about this author here. This is Stuart Ewen. He's pictured up on the screen if you are watching our presentation. A little bit about him as background. He is professor, again, this book was written in 1996. So I believe he's retired currently. But at the time, he was professor and chair of the Department of Film and Media Studies at Hunter College in New York City. He's also a professor in the PhD program in history and sociology at CUNY, City University of New York Graduate Center. Has several books, Captains of Consciousness, Channels of Desire, All-Consuming Images, and Typecasting, I think is one that came out after this book was released. And he's really good that in the beginning, he mentions his sources. We love the sources. Tell us where you got your information. He does mention right in the beginning that he owes gratitude to specific sources. One of them is the New York Public Library that was helpful with his research. Another was the Wexler Library at Hunter College. Another was Princeton University Library and Columbia University Library. Also, of significant importance at a certain point in the beginning of this book is the AT&T Corporate Archives in Warren, New Jersey. Keep AT&T in your mind. The National Association of Manufacturers Historical Archives. Also, his personal interviews with the elderly at the time, Edward Bernays, Eddie Boy. Um, he also had a close contact with a Standard Oil public relations executive from the 1940s, and also a FDR staffer that was there in the 1940s. He also gives a thanks to the Massachusetts Institute for a New History that was pivotal in a lot of his research. So before we go deep diving into the history, let's talk a little bit about some quotes. Ashley, do you have a couple quotes from the beginning of this book? Great to start with a quote to get our palates wet and ready for this material. What do you have for us?
I do. So there's a lot of good quotes at the beginning of this book, and we have chosen a couple that we felt were especially good, especially applicable. So here we go. It is of great consequence to disguise your inclination and to play the hypocrite well. And men are so simple in their temper and so submissive to their present necessity that he that is neat and cleanly in his collusions shall never want people to practice them upon. Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince, 1512.
And like we said, propaganda is nothing new. It has been around for centuries, millennia. The Romans used the bread and circuses. There's always been distraction. There's always been manipulation of the public, but never have we encountered mass media in relation to mass manipulation and public relations and propaganda, which is where this book begins. The advent of mass media that changed the game for propaganda. Give me another, Ashley. Lay it on me.
A leader or an interest that can make itself master of current symbols is the master of the current situation. Walter Lippmann, Public Opinion, 1922.
Gives you the chills, doesn't it? Oof.
Well, it really does, especially that one, because that is something that we have talked about or has been talked about quite a bit, I would say, in hidden history or alt media circles, is the importance of symbology. And some of our favorite accounts specifically focus on symbology. And it's one of these things that, yes, it is an acquired skill and an acquired education to be able to identify them. But even knowing some of the basics, you can't unsee it once you recognize what they are. And of course, like that's some of the modern symbolism that we see in movies and shows all the time, the checkerboard, the one eye symbolism, things like this. But I find that very interesting knowing what we know about the power of symbology and maybe what we don't know about the power of that.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Do you have a third quote you can give us this evening?
I do. The engineering of consent is the very essence of the democratic process, the freedom to persuade and suggest.
Wait a
Edward Bernays.
Sorry, go on.
Edward Bernays, The Engineering of Consent, 1947.
Pardon my interruption there. I'm so sorry. I just got so excited over that. The democratic process involves the freedom to persuade and suggest. Why that would be so harmful to our democracy.
It could be dangerous for our democracy.
Unbelievable. We should have people on TV repeating how dangerous this could be to our democracy. They could be saying it in tandem on some spliced together videos. Incredible.
That's a good idea. I'm gonna see if I can send out a tweet to some of the major studios suggesting that, and we'll see if they take that suggestion.
Wow. Endangering our democracy. God, this thing that's so precious to us that, it is the 50+1 rule. Oh my gosh, if 51% of the population says we have to kill all children, well, I guess we have to do it because that was a democratic vote. Oh, that can't be a dangerous thing, could it be?
No,
Because we don't want them playing to our base desires. You know,
correct. We
if they
don't.
did that, they would be manipulating us. I broke Ashley already. Yes.
Ah, indeed.
All right. Well, thank you for those three quotes. I appreciate it. I love starting off with some old-fashioned quotes like that. Let's get into our first evil doer. Ah, look at that face. Eddie boy. Edward Bernays. So the book starts off with the author's very entertaining visit with yours truly, Edward Bernays, friend of the show. Not really, but um, it's been said quite often that Bernays is the nephew of Sigmund Freud. People are not exactly correct when they say that. He's actually the double nephew of Sigmund Freud. Uh, Bernays' mother was Freud's sister, and Bernays' father was Freud's wife's brother. So he is the double effin nephew of Sigmund Freud. I've never heard that repeated until I read it in this book. Incredible information. What a family he's in. What a lucky guy. No comment, Ashley? Okay. I
Well,
guess you're
yes,
just flabbergasted. Oh, he's the
uh,
double nephew, double
well,
evildoer.
yeah, I am flabbergasted, and the other thing, is that this is really interesting when we're looking at or when we're talking about the potential for the the theory of hidden aristocracy, right? And the fact that the people that are the movers and shakers or the power players, as we referred to them already at the beginning of this episode, it's a small circle, but it's an overlapping circle. The Venn diagram or the chain link fence, as is kind of described um, by Walter Boert, the cryptocracy. There's a lot of overlap. I mean, I'm not saying it's like a one for one with these people and these organizations, but it is very closely linked and especially made obvious to us by the fact that Bernays is the double nephew.
Quite incredible. Um, Bernays, uh, Eddie Boy, Edward Bernays, known for his books Propaganda and Crystallizing Public Opinion, amongst his most popular. He spearheaded the movement to change the use of the term propaganda to public relations. So there's your quick little background. I'm sure most people know about him. Let's get into the meeting with the author. So, October 1990, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Quite a memorable event. The author arrived, and an elderly woman brought him in the house to meet Edward Bernays for their appointment and brings him to a library room. So he's meant to sit in the library room. Um, he sits in this library room and is like, "Oh my God, this is an unbelievable area. I can't believe it. Did he forget what's going on?" A lot of thoughts going through the author's head because he's made to wait in the library room of Edward Bernays' home. Bernays eventually shows up in a beautiful suit. He's in his 90s at the time. And he Bernays says, "We can't talk here. I have to take you somewhere else." So he follows Bernays to the staircase with one of those grandma chairs that ride up the staircase,
Yes, it's the chairlift.
the chairlift. And rather than Bernays sitting on it, he has the author sit on the chair, and Bernays stands on the side of it, and they go up the stairs nice and slow together. Quite a memorable experience, I might add.
And I just want to throw in here, Sean, that this put Bernays in a position of hovering over and above his guest, our author.
Absolutely. Nothing Bernays did was by mistake. So they get to the top of the stairs, they go down a hallway, they go through a room that's filled with pictures of Bernays with the power elite of the 20th century. Then they move to sit in a small, cluttered office with two little chairs in it. Um, the author says around this room, there were bookshelves that were obviously the arsenal of an intellectual. And he realized at this point, after being grilled and drilled by Bernays first, rather than Bernays allowing questions to be asked to him, Bernays flips the script and says, "Tell me more about yourself." He knew everything already, but he wanted to drill the author that came to visit and interview him. So it's afterwards that the author says, "Holy shit, I was propagandized. He did this entirely on purpose. He showed me how powerful he was. He made me wait. He stood above me. He showed me all these pictures. He showed me his books, and then he made me talk about myself first before opening up. And that was all by design. Well done, Eddie B." So Eddie B, Eddie Bernays, uh, very open speaker once he does talk to the author, and he is describes his unabashedly hierarchical view of society. He speaks of the quote intelligent few, that they are the managerial class. Now think social Darwinism now, that they must be the stewards of society. He says, this is from Bernays, "The public relations expert is an applied social scientist." Of course he is. The author mentions, "Throughout our conversation, Bernays conveyed this hallucination of democracy. A highly educated class of opinion molding tacticians is continuously at work, analyzing the social terrain and adjusting the mental scenery from which the public mind, with its limited intellect, derives its opinions." So you can kind of get the idea of Bernays's elitist mindset of the human mind, the public mind, the middle class, the lower class mind is feeble, it's broken, it's chaotic, and it is our job to be the stewards of society and make sure we maintain the peace and keep them moving in the direction that we want them to be. Um, he describes Bernays describes in this meeting with the author the requirement for those in power to shape the attitudes of the general population for the common good. And that the aristocracy is giving way to the technocracy coming up. Incredible. Bernays also quoted as saying, "Newsworthy events involving people usually do not happen by accident. They are planned deliberately to accomplish a purpose, to influence our ideas and actions." And that's a lot of craziness coming out of Bernays' mouth, but he doesn't talk any different than any of the other cryptocrats, technocrats, elite socialites of the world, that they are the stewards of society. It is their job to do this. They were chosen to do this. They believe it is their duty to manage us, to be the managerial class. And I have to bring up a a critical point, a critical concept that we're going to see again and again, and Bernays is right there for all of it, and that's the concept of astroturfing. You know what this means, Ashley, right?
Yes. And this would be basically whenever like what he was referencing as far as a story not being there by accident. This would be planted there on purpose, or somebody is given authority that really didn't earn it. They're given that authority in order to put them in a place of authority and to make them appear authoritative. So it's something being placed in the public purview intentionally and given attention.
Absolutely. Well said. The astroturfing is an orchestrated grassroots mobilization. So is anything but grassroots. but it gets looked upon as if it is grassroots. Social applause sign is another term for astroturfing. Um, Same thing with statistical polls say that's another method of using astroturfing. Those polls are absolute poppycock garbage. That's a nothing burger. But all they have to do is put statistical polls say in front of a news headline, and people will believe whatever bull crap they put up there. Unfortunately, not after we're done with them because we're educating the world, right? Am I right?
You're exactly right. And the other thing is that once again, this recalls some of the imagery that is associated with who I refer to as the current predator class. So there was photos, I believe, if I recall correctly, of Bill Gates with the book How to Lie with Statistics. So it's not that every poll is not truthful all the time, but it is that we need to wonder, what was the sample size? Who was asked? Who conducted the study? What was asked? In order for us to be able to have a fair conclusion about what information they're actually trying to tell us.
Absolutely. Professional PR companies, they specialize in the astroturfing concept. They specialize in this. There are specialists in astroturfing making big movements look exactly like they were thought up in someone's backyard. Like someone created, I don't know, an internet outlet in the garage of their mother's house in Northern California that we've heard again and again and again, and nobody should believe any of that shit.
Exactly. That is exactly what I was thinking about. Or, oh, well, I'm just a regular kid at Harvard. And I just had this idea because I like the chicks of like, what if I could get everybody to put their name, age, and photo on an intranet, and then people can also like post kind of like AOL AIM, but a little bit different. What do you think?
Exactly. I'm just a robot trying to live a human life, and I need to look at people like they're robots too. So if I could put a picture of them on a robotic computer screen, and then I can pretend they're doing robotic things, then I can feel really good about myself.
Yeah, that's our Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg, very good. Well, this astroturfing thing ain't nothing new. It's been it's been going on for 100 years or more. Philip Leslie, a prominent PR figure going back to the 1940s, publishes a monthly newsletter called Managing the Human Climate. There you go. People can look that up and read some of that. In their September to October 1993 issue, he writes of the plan to co opt the victims movement. Have we seen any of that today? Has there been any of that today, Ashley?
I
Okay, the short answer is easy
Yes.
answer is yes. Of
Yes.
course, every victims movement is co-opted. They don't let anything fall by the wayside. All of this is planned. Just as Brene said, if there's any piece of news that involves more than one person, you can be damn well sure that we made it up. Mic drop.
Bam.
Bam. All right. I'm going to get into the age of publicity now. We will be touching on Bernays again, that evil doer, very soon. We're going to go to, let's move forward in my notes. Okay. We're entering the era of mass media. Put yourself here. There was no mass media 130 years ago, and it starts showing up. You've got a postal service. You've got a telegraph now, a telephone. You've got transportation. You've got larger meeting rooms. You've got radio. This is what we mean when we talk about the era of mass media. Newspapers, magazines, periodicals. They're all being forwarded, pardon me, all over the country. That's the era of mass media that we're going to get our minds into now. I'm going to read from the book for a moment. Don't hate me. A new and increasingly disembodied public sphere was being spawned by the dramatic growth of mass circulation media between the early 1880s and the First World War. It began with newspapers. Newspapers, like nearly everything else, were becoming embroiled in giant enterprise, in circulations, in the number of pages per issue and in the volume of advertising. The great newspapers grew to sizes scarcely dreamed before, while figures representing investments, costs, and revenues reached astonishing totals. The distribution of individual newspapers multiplied, and with the flowering of large newspaper chains led by E.W. Scripps, people in a wide diversity of locales were being provided on a daily basis with congruous constructions of reality. Powerful commercial locomotives, newspapers, and news chains, linked further by the expanding information network of the wire services, transported standardized news, information, and editorial perspectives through what was fast becoming a national media culture. From the refuge of their middle class homes, they were becoming part of a virtual reading public. Shortly, middle class magazines began to contribute to this trend. So get yourself in that mindset. This is 1880, 1890, 1900, 1910. Newspapers and magazines, periodicals are starting to flourish.
It's a game changer. It's
It is an
absolutely.
abs- yeah.
Yes, huge. I mean, it's difficult for us to imagine because we have all the information everywhere all the time, which of course is of my opinion that is in itself a form of warfare, but this was something that was completely different for the average person. They did not have access to information in the way that they were starting to have access to that, and it was also in some ways very similar of what we have today or what you would have had from when you had your major news stations. That's where everybody got their information. So it had the ability to be highly manipulated and highly curated.
Absolutely. And with that era of newspaper mass media, someone is entering the chat or something, and that is muckrake journalism. Muckrake journalism, the exposés on corporate greed. This is 1880, 1890, 1900. Uh, People are noticing monopolies being formed. They know about the robber barons. They know about the powerful rich elite. They know they have a lot of sway in government, and people were not for this. They did not like it. And that brought about muckrake journalism. And they worked hard. These original muckrake journalists were great. They exposed a lot. There were novels as well that came out. The Octopus, The Jungle, The Shame of Cities. These were all books that like got the public hungry for combating corruption, for combating the giant corporations. They all wanted to work. They all wanted to make a living. They wanted the government. They did want government protection, but they did not want big corporations ruling over them. This was a heavy thing in early muckrake journalism. This new progressive publicity, we'll call it, by 1910 had two sides. The first, using the unprecedented power of mass media as a tool for assembling the public around national concerns. The second is isolation and spectatorship. No longer taking to public squares, readers of mass media were witnesses from the sanctuary of their parlors. Ergo, vulnerable to manipulation through media. An emotion was beginning to take over fact. And you can see, you can understand how that would happen once you're reading about these corruption exposés by these muckrake journalists. You're going to get fired up for it, and you're not doing it in the public square. You're getting it every single day in your newspaper that's being delivered to you. You're going out to get that newspaper to read it in private, and you're getting heated. Scary thing.
Yes. Yeah, and these people, because this was about the regular person. This was about the human condition, about the working conditions that they were exposed to, about the danger, about the exploitative nature of the companies that they were working for. And so it was very powerful. And then we will see later in this presentation the fact that emotion is it's good for people to care about these stories, but it also is an emotion, or it's a human reaction that the predator class are able to weaponize against people. So keep that in mind. This like juxtaposition, like it is important to have emotion when you're caring about, the working class or the working man or people that are being preyed upon, but also it was exposed as a vulnerability for us, the regular person.
Absolutely, well said. That rise in emotion is going to could make the public chaotic because they're kind of getting whipped up into a frenzy, albeit they're doing it more privately now. But it could turn into something big. It could turn into a big nationwide movement. The author says, after almost 3 decades of an ever growing progressive populace begging for reform and big business accountability, we have someone else to enter the chat. And that man is Walter Lippmann. Walter Lippmann. Oh, what a character. Look at that picture. Looking nice and dapper. So he enters the chat after these 3 decades of this growing progressive movement that wants big business accountability, and they're constantly reading about big business corruption. So let's find out about Walter Lippmann. Well, he's Harvard educated, as you do. In 1910, he joins uh, magazines to be a muckrake journalist and eventually joins the Socialist Party. But in 1914, he writes a book called Drift and Misery. This gets him quickly on the radar of President Roosevelt at the time and President Wilson. Wilson even invites him to his inner circle to pick his brain. So Lippmann goes from being a muckrake journalist exposing big business and corruption to then writing about the danger that the public plays in this role, and then gets brought right into the White House to sit with the president and have tea and crumpets with him to share ideas so they can learn from him. Typical story, you know? Um,
And while you're getting to your next spot, Sean, I will
yeah,
say it is a typical story. And this is where we obviously the human being is corruptible. We know that. We hope that you wouldn't be, but it's possible that Walter Lippmann was bought off, that he was promised a lot of money. It's possible that he was merely, this like clout chasing sycophant. And so he actually didn't care one way or the other, that he had no true loyalty to his muckrake journalism. Or it's possible that now I think this is early in the game for this, but we know that coming especially like during the J. Edgar Hoover timeframe, that this is when blackmail began to be utilized, especially against these people. So it's possible that I don't know that it was as well worn at this particular time, but it could be any possibility of things that caused him to flip. Maybe he never had loyalty to begin with, but I always wonder with people like this that are starting out with a what appears to be good intentions, and then you see them actually switch sides and start working for, the machine.
absolutely. And it could be, I don't know what made him flip, if he ever really did flip, but this book he wrote, Drift and Misery, that gets on the radar of President Wilson, who invites him to the White House. He concludes the book with this, that the popular media of exposure and their countless tales of wrongdoing were contributing to an unwholesome atmosphere of social unrest that threatened to spin out of control. He saw the growing whirl of accusation as a collective psychological malady, a dangerous condition of paranoia that, unless checked, posed a greater danger to society than excesses of wealth. Oof, yikes. So he described basically saying the social scientists and social engineers need to learn techniques to quell the masses, that because they're inundated and to all this anti-corruption and all these exposés, all this muckrake journalism, they're getting built up into a frenzy, and they are more dangerous than the people that are being exposed in the exposés. So we must learn how to control and subdue the population. And Wilson loved it. We're
And
gonna sorry.
that's a well-worn trope, just really quickly, very well worn. This is something that I believe we've seen be weaponized in today's day and time in certain movements. So you were talking about how victims movements were taken over, but this is also an example of how a reform movement or an accountability movement would be identified all this time ago as a threat to the system. Now the trope is that the powers that shouldn't be, or the government structure, is just going to call you a terrorist and use that in order to do whatever they do to break up the movement. If they don't, in some cases it's actively breaking up the movement, or sullying the reputation of the movement. Sometimes it is astroturfing, and sometimes it's infiltration. So there's a lot going on, but this is one of the things that I was talking about at the very beginning of this, that you can see represented in certain ways to this day. This is still happening.
Absolutely. Still happening today. Controlling the public, controlling the chaos because we're so bad. Oh, we might need another person to enter the chat now to control the chaos of the public. Let's have enter the chat Gustav Le Bon. And look at that beard. Unbelievable. You know how long it would take me to grow a beard like that?
You could never grow a beard like that.
Thank you. I'll take that to my grave. I appreciate it. You're right. I never could. That's unbelievable. Look at that
He
hair.
does
Is that
have
a pompadour? I don't even
it's
know
a
what the
vibe.
hell.
It's a vibe. I'm not sure about the hat, but yeah, he has an air about him. That's for sure.
Incredible. Well, Gustave Le Bon, a French social psychologist, really, really influential on the early propaganda in the mass media era in the States. Very influential to public relations councils early in the 1900s. His 1895 book, The Crowd, A Study of the Popular Mind, was published and sent all over the world. It soon became a Bible for those hired as the first social engineers. In the book, he wrote of his worries about the climate of popular unrest. Teddy Roosevelt, big fan. Teddy boy loved Gustave Le Bon's book and kept it with him. Elites at this time were starting to recognize the need to co-opt the connective tissue of modern life. Mass media. Let's have another evildoer enter the chat. Let's bring in Gabriel Tard or Tarday. I don't know how to say it. Gabriel Tard. What do you think?
I say Gabriel Tardet.
Gabriel Tarday. I'm running with it. Another Frenchman, close friend of Le Bon, prominent social scientist, focused on what he called the public instead of the crowd, whereas Le Bon was talking about the chaos of crowds and the crowd. Pardon me. Tarday was focusing on what he called the public. And he said specifically that newspapers have transformed unified in space, and diversified in time the conversations of individuals, even those who do not read papers, but who, talking to those who do, are forced to follow the groove of their borrowed thoughts. One pen suffices to set off a million tongues. That is very true and quite scary.
Yes, it is, and it kind of goes to the modern day, phrase that I have heard uttered is, "Your thoughts are not your own." And the other thing I wanna point out, if you are watching the slideshow, check out Gabrielle Tardé's, photo here. He's drawn making a, Masonic-like hand sign, which is the pyramid, the 2 thumbs together and the pointer fingers together. So, there's a little, conspiracy candy, as Sean would say.
I didn't even notice that, but wow, good on you. Look at you. You get a gold star for the day for pointing that out. Incredible. You must have been an A student
Sometimes.
when you wanted to be.
Exactly.
All right, let's touch on another evildoer. This will be Ferdinand Tönnies. That's a stellar bit of facial hair he has, none on top of his head. Soon to be me. This was a German sociologist, and his focus primarily was newspapers. He believed news media was an instrument of social order, and it can be used to quell and manipulate the public, and wrote extensively on this. He said, quote, "Presence is not essential to mass suggestion. The public swallows up the individuality of its members." End quote. That's all I got on Ferdinand Tönnies.
Okay, and we'll get to our next evildoer. But in the meantime, really quickly, I just wanted to say you can see how all of these people are specializing in something different. There is overlap, but there is different people in different areas that they would be considered a subject matter expert. And I think it's very interesting that you would really need all of these things to be amalgamated, to be collated in order to officially bring them into the fold of social science or behavioral science.
You're absolutely right. These elite social scientists, I know you hate when I use the word elite, but I'm doing it anyway because you love it.
I love it. Go for it.
They're not just from the United States of America. They are all over the place. We just mentioned a couple Frenchmen and a German. The Germans definitely not known for propagandizing with newspapers any of their people around their 30s or 40s at all. So they
There's
must have
no
ignored this guy.
there's no precedent whatsoever.
Absolutely. So that's Ferdinand Tönnies. People are welcome to look him up. That's Tonnies is his last name, on his manipulation of the masses via newspapers in Germany. Let's move forward to another evildoer. I love this guy's name, Ivy Ledbetter Lee. Oh, he looks like the perfect grandfather in this photo. Just let him hold your newborn baby. Isn't that incredible? This guy is a Princeton graduated Princeton in 1898. He was haunted, quote unquote, haunted by Le Bon's book on the crowd and how dangerous the crowd was. After graduating college, he became a consultant to the railroad and business executives. Like to hang around Wall Street a lot too. He offered advice for the critical line of defense against the crowd because he was so haunted by Le Bon's work. He also worked as a newspaper reporter. He's often called the first news engineer. Was often hired for companies' damage control while doing his consulting around Wall Street, and these big business execs, they hired him for damage control.
So maybe after they had a muckrake hit piece go out, maybe something like that?
That is exactly what I'm getting to. And in 1914, he began working for a family. You might have heard of them, Ashley, the Rockefeller family. Have you heard of them?
It's vaguely ringing a bell.
Incredible. Well, they had a big to do in 1914.
A big to do. Okay, go
a
ahead.
big to do. A big to do. Just one of their many to dos, this Rockefeller family, um, which we'll talk about more in the future. Specifically about that family through time. But tonight we're going to talk about their to do with the Ludlow Massacre in 1914. In 1914, 14, I can't say 14 again, 14 striking miners and their families were viciously slaughtered on behalf of the Rockefeller mining interests in Colorado, the Colorado Iron and Fuel Company. Amongst mounting evidence in Rockefeller complicity, Ivy Lee was brought in for, you guessed it, damage control. So a bunch of miners were not happy about this. They're striking, and there is mounting evidence that the Rockefellers said, kill these people because they killed the men, women, and children of these miners. It's pretty brutal. And it was in newspapers nationwide. So Ivy Lee gets hired and he's brought in and he goes through a series of events to try to do the best he can for damage control. Before I give you his examples of damage control, or what you might call spin, did you have any comment, Ashley?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this was first of all, I didn't know about the Ludlow massacre until we had discussed it until it was in this book, but it is it's horrifying, and it's a well documented example really of the whistleblower or the people that are trying to affect change and what can happen to them, and how people that are in a very powerful situation can get away with that. Now, we of course, many of us think that we still observe this happening today, but it is often more obscure, or it's more hidden than it was at this time. And something that really stuck out with me is as you get into the story, but the fact that the predator class really learned something from this particular example, because they found out what bad PR was. And in the way that this gets handled, I feel like this was a cornerstone going forward in managing bad PR, and I find it extremely fascinating.
It really is. I'll tell you what Ivy Lee did exactly, and these tactics have been repeated again and again and again and again through history. And he was not the stay by the wayside hiree. He made himself front and center representative for the family. He was the head representative for the Rockefeller family and their interests during this to do in Colorado. So let me tell you what he did for damage control, for spin, if you will. As per the title of this book, Ivy Lee, produced a series of circulars concerning, quote unquote, what he called the facts. He also sent bulletins to opinion leaders, to public officials, to editors, to ministers, to teachers, to businessmen, filled with inaccuracies, all to prove that the wrongdoers were, quote, well paid agitators sent out by the Union, end quote. So he blamed this not on the assassins that the Rockefellers hired, but by wealthy union leaders that were not happy that their people were striking, and that the union leaders are just private rich men that want to, kick you down with their boots. So that was one of his tactics of spin. Another tactic was fuller, further bulletins that contained false witness testimony. Um, and that these false witness testimonies focused around the explosions that were happening around this mass murder of people, and these people, not even real people or people that were there, that were claiming in these bulletins that it was just a stove exploded and it killed these 14 men and their wives and their children. So sorry, so sad. It was an accident, not the Rockefellers. Good night. And there were plenty other more spins, but there was some success in this. So it was learned upon by members of the ruling class and by other public relations agents and publicists and newspaper editors. They started following this and seeing how it was working and where stuff wasn't working and how they could manipulate events in the future based on Ivy's failings or his overcomings.
Exactly. If I may interject here, Sean, it's
Oh
like
yeah.
if, for example, if you're trying to do your own social media in today's day and time and you're trying to promote an idea, a product, whatever that is, oftentimes it's recommended for you to do an A/B trial. So you can do the same information. There's a same foundation to that post or that campaign, whatever you're doing, but there are differences in your A or B post. And whatever those differences, it may be aesthetics, it may be placement, it may be phrasing, however however that ends up taking place. But that is exactly what this is in, at the beginning of this really is he tried a lot of different methods in order to discredit the narrative that was out there against the Rockefeller family. And like you said, people were studying and learning based on what did or did not work. And the other thing that we had talked about is, what maybe they wouldn't have been able to get everybody's belief to be changed about it being the Rockefeller, but in this PR move that he had, or in these moves that he was making, he was able to sway some opinion. So it's not everybody that you are getting to believe or not believe, but when you could start to move the needle and at least have like what we discussed in a courtroom setting, right? You're leaving reasonable doubt. So like maybe that's all that they needed in this case to try to stave off some sort of public, you know, uh fire and pitchforks situation.
Absolutely. It's going to convince some people. And he didn't need to convince all people. He just needed to convince some people. And when all of your news is talking about the Rockefellers and this story, and then everything coming from editors, ministers, teachers, businessmen, public officials, uh, newspapers, magazines, periodicals, all of them are now repeating what Ivy Lee sent out to them through all of his connections and probably bribes as well. Uh, Now you're inundated with that, and that's all you see. And the more you see of it, the more you start to believe it. Well, it must be true because I'm seeing it everywhere. Oh, it was in that newspaper, and this person said it. Oh, it must be true. Like you said, it creates that reasonable doubt, and that's all they needed to do. Put some doubt in there. You just need some of the people to not believe it. Good point, Ashley.
Thank you. And this one's this guy is really important. So if people are interested in pursuing that further, but this was very foundational. I know a lot of stuff we're saying is cornerstone and foundational to this book and to these techniques and these principles, but they actually are. So
Absolutely. And like I said before, he was the front man for the Rockefeller family. And after this whole to do, this fiasco subsided, and the Rockefellers essentially not found guilty for this, um, it brought up a new era in public relations. No longer because they learned from Ivy Lee. People started calling him Poison Ivy Lee. So rather than having your public relations expert be the front man for you or your corporation, your company, your business, your estate, they now started to work from behind the scenes. They started to work in the shadows. And the author even mentions a doctor of publicity would operate as an unfailing behind the scenes advisor, an invisible counsel, offering perpetual guidance on what to say, how best to behave, and even how to restore a corporation for the purpose of securing public confidence. Ivy Lee christened such unaccustomed intercourse between public interest and corporation policy a two-way street, a self-congratulatory phrase that has preserved in canonical folk tales of the public relations industry ever since.
Yes, and this is it, like Sean was saying, you see this over and over again. This is why in and celebrity culture is changing, certainly, but this is why they would have their own publicist. This is why they would have their own PR team, and then they would probably even have a crisis PR team if they were someone who was prone to getting into you know, unpalatable situations, and they would have these people that helped to manage, but you never knew who those people were. You only saw them making a statement, or perhaps the publicist would make a statement, but otherwise, you did not see the moving pieces of the PR or crisis PR team that was being employed by this celebrity in order to save their reputation and clean up their mess.
Absolutely. So let's jump into another case study. We don't have a picture for this, but it is about AT&T, the company all of you know about. Um, AT&T around 1907 decide they want a monopoly. This is during an anti-corporate, anti-monopoly movement by the public at the time. AT&T decided to sneakily use public relations to take over the telephone industry nationwide, essentially create a monopoly. This while the public was pushing for a new public service, the telephone. So the telephone was gaining popularity. It's 1910 or so, and there's talks amongst crowds of people and even in government of making this the next utility. The post office was federalized and it was so popular that in this new era of mass media, it only made sense that the telephone should be a not held by private companies like it is today. It should be a federal utility for the public. Instead, you see where we are today. Your cell phone bill, your telephone bill, your cable bill, that might have all been different if AT&T in 1907 decided, no, we'll skip it. Go ahead, federal government, you can handle this. Doesn't mean it would be free, but it would be handled much differently. It would be like the post office. So now entering the chat, as you can see on the screen in a moment, James T. Ellsworth. Give him an anti-round of applause, everybody. Thank you. He's a journalist at the Publicity Bureau in Boston. He's hired to steer the AT&T account. He's hired to help bring about this monopoly, convince the public that they don't need another federal utility. They need private industry, private companies to hold monopolies on the telephone. Incredible shit here. His first objective was to change the name. So originally it was called AT&T Bell System, and he changed the name to the Bell Companies. This is an example of image management, as he called it. This, pardon me, removing the name System was a good idea for him because he said system suggested a trust, and they wanted to get the public's idea of a trust gone. They wanted it to sound like AT&T, by offering their monopolistic service, would be doing the people a favor for getting them something they could have in no other way. Pardon me, I got.
While Sean is doing that, I would just say that yes, this idea of just changing the name, I think, is something that's really important. And we probably don't necessarily notice it as much, but certainly we do notice it in certain changes that are made for a very huge public company. For example, we had the huge scandal back in, I think this was the 80s. Correct me if you remember when this was, but this was when Coke was actually changing their recipe supposedly, and it ended up being a giant marketing win for Coca-Cola for them to present that they were changing the recipe of Coke. And that got a ton of publicity. Then recently we had a huge controversy that supposedly was just Cracker Barrel moving to the more modern symbol of, and like streamlining their stores, and they had this new CEO and they wanted a new look. And they were moving away from that traditional Cracker Barrel symbol, and there was once again a huge public outcry. So this goes to show us, whether right, wrong, or indifferent or whatever about the Cracker Barrel logo, the point is that the public is tuned in to these things, particularly for huge companies. So even though when AT&T was making these money moves, this wasn't in our modern day time, but you can bet that that change, although maybe subtle, to drop the word system, that the language surrounding the title and changing sort of the branding was actually really important for their public relations, sales, messaging, particularly their desire to kind of take over the landscape in a monopoly. That was a very important move. And once again, as we're talking about, this is a cornerstone type situation. This is not that these things have never been done before, but these are some pretty significant examples of how you can see how they gained popularity from this time, in the 1900s, going forward to what we see today. Sean, back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. The next thing that James T. Ellsworth did as the head of PR at AT&T was he promoted friendly relationships with editors and publishers around the country, specifically around anti-AT&T areas, to publish impartial feature articles about AT&T. By 1900, you see, advertising, not circulation, was prime income for newspapers. So he began providing compliant editors with packaged articles ready to print. So it offered a way to save money for the newspapers. This gave Bell, AT&T Bell, massive access to news columns. Ellsworth was promoted to the head of the newly created AT&T information department because they didn't want to use the word PR. They said information department. AT&T, evildoers, not a sponsor of
Sounds
the show.
not a sponsor. It sounds like a familiar technique. I mean, these types of things of just, for example, I don't know, maybe calling something the Department of War instead of the Department of Defense, or naming it the Department of War and then changing it to the Department of Defense and then changing it back willy nilly to Department of War. These
Department of
types of.
War, the greatest department.
We're going to bring so much war. You're going to be sick of the war. So these
Winning.
tools, these techniques are just so well trodden. Still to this day, it's really amazing. And one of the other things that we're talking about, as far as like these people are going into places that the everyday person is frequenting, such as church, such as, whatever, local businesses, of course, newspapers. And that also was a technique that was used during the pandemic. There was active outreach to a lot of these community places that were important in the lives of the day-to-day people. And it's just, it's not funny, but it kind of makes me laugh, because these techniques, once discovered and once utilized and once they really were able to kind of hone in on what really worked, they have not stopped using them to this day, even in this very technological time.
Absolutely. Well said. Let's stick with AT&T a little bit more. So let's have another person enter the chat. Theodore Newton Vale. It looks like the Monopoly guy was beaten with a stick. Wonderful. He was the president of AT&T who hired Ellsworth. Very intelligent guy, very up to date with his elitist writings of public relations at the time. He knew how to manipulate the system. So he openly spoke of the need to educate the public, meaning the middle class, to buffer threats and dissent from the lower classes. So almost like to create a class war, if you will. um, he's got a 9-point plan. I'm going to fly through it because I want to get to World War I. So, what was Theodore Newton Vail's 9-point plan to gain the monopoly of AT&T over the telephone in the United States of America in the early 19 teens? Plan point number 1: overcharge long distance calls for business users to subsidize price for everyone else's local calls. Convince the public that they need bell services for their local calls. Brilliant. Plan point number 2: operators had to be female, courteous, woman's voice for all AT&T operators. Plan point number 3: advertise good pay and benefits for working at AT&T. This was unprecedented at the time. Plan number 4: ads. Symbols of joy and frolicking through meadows with AT&T, your public service provider. Plan point number 5: local publicity agents to be intimate with every reporter. Probably means bribes. Plan point number 6: collect intelligence and surveillance on all adversaries. Plan point number 7: damage control. Dun, dun, dun. Get out in front of any and all negative press. Plan point number 8: follow dissenting politicians. Get to the crowds before he spoke publicly. Plan point number 9. It's almost a semi-Delphi method. Distribute quote unquote debate kits to be used in public forums by embedded pro AT&T speakers. Incredible. And because of all this, because of these 9 points for his plan and the work with publishers and editors in the Publicity Bureau at AT&T by James Ellsworth, we now have monopolies that control our telephone services. And this was the origin of it. They are PR evildoer masters.
Even when we're supposed to be in a monopoly-free situation.
Yep, they convince the public that they need AT&T Bell services. We need my Bell. Oh, unbelievable. All right. Now we're not moving that much forward in time, but this is a critical point. Keep in mind that the establishment, the governments, the intelligence or secret societies, PR specialists, sociologists, they're seeing everything that's going on. They're seeing the writings, they're seeing things in newspapers, they're talking to other PR agents, they're learning more and more. And then we hit World War I. World War I was not a popular war. Anyway, let's jump into it. Give me a little bit of the next person entering the chat. This is the 4-Minute Men. No, the 4-Minute Men is not something for you to look up on Pornhub. This was a real thing that happened in 1918. The 4-Minute Men. 1918, 1.5 years into the Great War, also known as World War I. There's 75,000 members of the 4-Minute Men squad. About 150,000 times per week, a 4-Minute Man would rise and preach to their communities and preach the holiness of the American war effort and condemn any anti-war opinion. This was just one of the propaganda tactics used by President Wilson and the U.S. Committee on Public Information, CPI, which was established April 17th, April 1917, 1 week after the U.S. declared war on Germany. CPI, an incredible piece of history. That's the Committee on Public Information. What are they, you might be asking? Tell me a little bit more, you're thinking. Well, let me lay it on you. In 1916, President Wilson's re-election campaign was run on keep us out of war. So he was running for re-election on the campaign slogan, keeping us out of war.
Sean, if I may just state the obvious here, that sounds very familiar.
It does sound familiar. Isn't that? History is repeating itself, it sounds like. No more wars!
Almost exactly 100 years later.
Very true. Very well said. I didn't even think about the significance of the exact year numbers, but quite incredible. Wilson, of course, had British handlers. We won't get into it tonight, but we will touch on that in the future, of course. There were, however, as the war was building up in Europe, and Wilson is reelected, and he's thought to be an anti-war president, claims he is. There are millions of immigrants that were flooding into the United States for years, decades even. Many of them looking for the American dream and found it shattered. And they're shoved into slums and ghettos because we didn't have the infrastructure to hold them all and provide for everything right like that. And not when there's millions and millions every year. So a lot of those American dreams were broken. And when war was ginning up in Europe, there was a lot of concern in our government about where these immigrants' loyalty would lie. Would they start to hate the United States? Would they prevent us from going to war if we had to enter? Would they start siding with the country that they're from? What about Eastern Europeans? What about the Italians? What are they going to do? It was a real concern at the time. Enter now George Creel. Now, Creel, there are plenty of books by George Creel and his Creel Commission, as it's called, especially during World War II, and the Committee on Public Information. But he was brought in as the first the civilian director of CPI, the Committee on Public Information, that was created by President Wilson to manage information during this upcoming war. His goal as the head of or director of CPI was to sway the immigrants and in the ghettos towards war. A lot of the people came to the US, these millions of immigrants, to get away from any war. They knew America was quite isolationist at the time. And George Creel's job, at the behest of our president at the time and the Committee on Public Information, was to convince that massive immigrant population that we need war.
Really, I just I really hate that. I really, really hate that because I think that the human tendency is to be anti-war. Now, at this point, who knows? Because we've had so much of it in in the history of the United States. But I really hate that people had been preyed upon in that way to get them to want the war. But then this is a well-worn technique. We see it all the time. Manufacturing consent over and over and over.
Yep, absolutely. And we're going to get more into Creel, but I'd like to bring up another bastard. His name is Arthur Bullard. Let's see his mug. Look at that mug. Oh, Arthur, look at those glasses. I don't know where you got them, but I want them. He was an analyst at the time for President Wilson. This is just before the war. Same with Creel, brought in on the Committee on Public Relation, and Arthur Bullard, also with a close advisor to Wilson right before the war. He's an analyst. Um, he's quoted as saying, "Censorship won't work this time. We need a flood of publicity." Now they saw that just worked with AT&T, so they were on the right track, and we still see that crap today. Bullard's 4-point plan for flooding publicity was to organize a publicity bureau, requisition space uh, on the front page of every newspaper, a draft of trained writers to feed Army stories to the public, and to create a press corps or a corps of press agents. Walter Lippmann wrote to President Wilson saying, "I second Bullard's recommendation." So on April 6, 1917, war is declared. That's April 6th. By April 12th, the Publicity Bureau had been created with the help of our buddy Lippmann. Dun, dun, dun. Lippmann urged embedding propagandists in motion picture industry and creating a section to monitor foreign press. So enter Executive Order 2594. You can look it up on your own. That is the official creation of the Committee on Public Information. Creel is noted as the civilian director, even though he was already advising Wilson. He's called the civilian director. This is the classic bait and switch, if you will. He was a top progressive muckrake journalist, as you do, who wrote about government corruption and corporate excess. And he was hired to direct the CPI for war propaganda. Creel was acquainted with an extensive community of progressive journalists. When war was declared, progressive publicists fell into line with much needed liberal democratic rhetoric. See, either side can be convinced to join a war. Doesn't matter if you're Team Pepsi or Coke, you're Democrat or Republican, you can be manipulated just by other people you like. And they really liked Creel because he had a good reputation. So bringing him in to be pro-war all of a sudden, everyone else in his clique of publicists and publishers and editors just said, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, of course. Oh, Creel's doing it. Yeah, he's well respected. Okay, we'll fall in line.
And can you think of anybody in modern day times who perhaps has a very good reputation, who may make an impact, or why that would be utilized? I don't know. There's some pretty big podcast names out there that are known for having an open mind, for being logical thinkers, for caring about people. And I think that that is an example of how somebody like that could be utilized for this very reason. So maybe when this logical, laid back, amiable podcaster who has some of the biggest platforms on the entire planet starts talking about, I don't know, like AI being a god or AI management, then maybe that is a form of manufacturing consent from the public.
Manufacturing the consent. Absolutely. The author writes that with the assistance of advisors, Creel erected a publicity apparatus that, in scope and conception, transcended anything that had previously existed. In the domestic section of the CPI, for example, the division of news channeled thousands of official war news press releases through the mails and along telegraph lines on a 24-hour-a-day basis. In a move that extended beyond existing public relations practices, a direct effort was made to influence media aimed at immigrant populations, developing contacts with 600 foreign language papers published in 19 languages. The CPI made special appeals to a heterogeneous population whose loyalty was of special concern. that is a holy shit moment if I've ever heard it. That's
Yeah.
that's a lot of work to do. 600 foreign language papers in 19 languages, and he got into every single one of those. Creel also dove into the advertising market. Uh, Advertising had begun to associate goods with emotional lives, the needs, cravings, aspirations, and fear of the consumers to whom it spoke. And because by him, quote, people live mostly by catchphrases. So they started to add these war catchphrases uh, commissioned by him and his team into advertising. President Wilson and Creel brought into the leadership of the American Association of Advertising Agencies to create hundreds of ads and billboards. You can basically say the image is entering the chat now. CPI began constructing a language of images, and really that's leading up to post World War One time. But this is the advent of the image or the meme, the symbol as a propaganda tool.
Such as perhaps the iconic Uncle Sam wants you type of poster, right? You're
Precisely.
putting this very
Precisely.
short, exactly what we see in meme format today, but it's an idea, it's a vibe, it's a movement, but it is in the image and a very short amount of text, and it becomes very easy to remember. And then after a certain point, obviously, all you don't need to see, I want you. All you need to see is Uncle Sam, and you know what he's saying. I want you. So it is so powerful. And we've seen that, especially leading into like the 2014 and on in the meme wars and the powerful idea of the mimetic. And this is, in some ways, I think a way for regular people to be able to fight back is participating in the meme wars. But I also think that we need to understand that this is something that is probably accounted for, and who knows like how much of that is interfered with or added to by intelligentsia or somebody else out there that's trying to create PR. What, how much are they participating and or benefiting from the meme wars of today? But it's such a powerful idea in just a little bit of text and a little bit of imagery. So important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of images, let's enter into the chat the moving image known as Hollywood, the motion picture. CPI created a division of films. Uh, this was on purpose. They wanted to be able to reach the illiterate and the immigrant because they can all watch movies even if they can't read. They got to reach the illiterate. They did an extra special thing, though. They sent scripts and messages to popular producers to make films for them, and they funded their entire projects and stayed off the radar. So the most popular film creators uh, were being paid by CPI to make stories, make film out of the scripts that were privately sent by CPI and written by their evildoers. Quite incredible. I wonder if anything like that happens today.
We're too sophisticated for that.
This is just the thing of the past. They would never do that today, Ashley. Come on. They love
Obviously.
us. That's why the UN is meeting this week. It's because they love us.
Yes. And they have our best interests at heart.
Exactly. Continuing with images, over 200,000 slides, stereo opticon images, and photographs were produced for schools, churches, and community centers. They had a lot of people doing a lot of work for this movement. It really is quite incredible. And this is just a piece of what CPI did during the pro war propaganda and their pro war propaganda campaign. This is you can read about it on your own, and it would take you a year to really learn everything that they did. But they did something else, and we did talk about the 4 Minute Men, not talking Pornhub. What else did they do? Let's see what else you got up there for me, Ashley. The junior 4 Minute Men, because youth groups had to be reached. They had to reach the kids. And what better way than to mirror what the 4 Minute Men were doing by having junior 4 Minute Men? So train some high school students on what to say, have them jump up in a crowd, jump up in a church, jump up in a social setting, a meeting, a public forum, speak for 4 minutes, and move on with the meeting. Unbelievable.
And I just want to say, please clap, because a lot of these images I pulled from actual newspapers, and I'm very proud of myself. So thank you very much. But if you if you're interested, that was perfect. Thank you so much. I really needed that. If you're interested, check out some of these newspaper clips. And the other thing that I want to reiterate is that the newspaper clips in the PowerPoint presentation, but this is the idea of focusing on the youth, of understanding the importance of the youth and the power that they have to influence an entire generation. That is another cornerstone. That is something that you will see in other countries. I don't know that we're known to have a very powerful propaganda campaign that maybe is an everlasting imagery of the power of propaganda, the youth of that, but also in I find this to be very interesting in that if we were looking into intelligentsia and them, like, what are they what is their vision into schools? Or it's like what I'm trying to put together is that they obviously intelligentsia would have an eye, they would have a finger on the pulse for schools. And one of the major emphasis of the 4 Minute Men, especially I mean for all of them, but the junior 4 Minute Men is excellent oration skills. So, who was out there finding these students and making this happen, right? Obviously, it was like part of the CPI, but I'm just saying, like, that translates in today's day and time for me. For example, to like a Nick Fuentes or a Candace Owens or a Charlie Kirk. These are people that are appear to start organically, but I think that the case could be made that they're astroturfed, and they are very young, and they are speaking to a certain group of people, and they are excellent. They have excellent oratory skills. So this is an example, if nothing else, this is circumstantial evidence that there was an active movement by the government to find young speakers who were very, very good at the skill of oration. And I think that that is something that can be seen at this point and going forward. And whatever you may think of somebody like a Greta, oh man, I want to call her by the name, like the name that everybody makes fun of, Thunberg, but Greta Thornburg, that people like that would be an astroturfing. And whatever, if you don't like her, you have to say that she was able to, at a very young age, provide an impassioned speech that you probably have that image and that catchphrase that stays with you when you think of her. Sean, if I say
How
Greta
dare
Thornburg,
you?
exactly. Exactly. So just this is one of the things that I thought was so important. All this stuff is important, but I find this to be especially important because of the potential ramifications that this is still happening to this day, combined with the astroturfing. And then what message are people being fed from the people that were chosen here?
Damn, couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you very much for that. But we're not done. But wait, there's more. What else could they have done? Of course, they have to have the colored 4 Minute Men. So, CPI has trained their agents to go into colored communities and find the best orators, train them, and get them to become the the colored 4-minute men that can speak up at these other events that they may not, their other trained people may not be allowed into. So they're hitting it from every angle. It really is quite incredible. Moving on from the colored 4-minute men.
Really quick,
Oh,
I just
yeah,
wanted
go
to say,
lay it
yes,
on me.
an example, they wanted to leave nothing to chance. They wanted all communities to be represented in their propaganda efforts, first of all. Second of all, we know that it is not considered politically correct or respectful in today's day and time to use the term colored. So we are not saying that because we are trying to be offensive at all. This was what the 4-minute men who were who were dealing with the black community at that time, that is what they were referred to, and that is why we are calling them by that name, and that is not to be offensive to anybody.
Thank you for making that distinction. Hopefully no one's just listening and then they think, "Oh, Sean's an asshole. He's calling us colors."
I hope not, but I just,
I hope not.
I just wanted
This
to
is what the
say.
name was. We're not adulterating the name. We're using the exact title of the organization that they put together. This is the exact name that they gave it, the Colored 4-Minute Men of Brunswick. They were just another group of 4-minute men trying to be pro-war and get another group of people. And it's a great point. They don't leave anything to chance. And this is what the intelligence agencies do today. They don't leave anything to chance. They embed themselves in publishing groups, in UFO groups, in book clubs, in podcast world, in Food Network. They make sure there is no movement anywhere. The Olympics crowd, athletes, everything. They have to have their people everywhere. So nothing is left to chance. And CPI during World War II did the same damn thing. You could almost say it was an intelligence group. It was. Pardon me.
Um, okay. My apologies. I just snorted. I think that's the first time for a podcast, but
I
yeah,
didn't
it
hear you
just
snore. I just heard you laugh. It's okay.
okay, okay, good. So, but just to say that this is every community, every angle that was looked at in order to continue to manufacture consent for whatever they were trying to do at that time, knowing, in this democratic republic, knowing that public sentiment was against the war, but they didn't care. So instead of respecting what the people wanted, they decided we're going to change their mind in an underhanded way. So it's really, honestly, it's incredible. Like you have to respect the hustle. I guess I hate it. I hate that that's what happened and where we're at, and that it was that easy to infiltrate the communities. But it was evil genius for sure.
Absolutely. If I was evil genius, I'd be doing the same exact thing. I wouldn't take any
Sure.
chances. I'd get into every single group. There's an anti-war movement out there. Okay, I'm going to get my people in there. I want to know exactly what they're saying, when they're saying, how they're saying it, and who's involved. And that's the same thing these groups are doing today for every topic.
Right. And not only intelligence gathering, but creating public sentiment.
Yeah.
And, that's something that we need to be looking out for and being discerning. But I would say that it's very difficult in this day and time, whenever obviously these were techniques that were being deployed 100 years ago. I would say that sophistication has greatly improved since then. And then, as we had mentioned before, with the adding AI to the equation and think tanks with endless budgets and all the information, I would say that the techniques have gotten more sophisticated. So we need to be on our lookout for this stuff.
Absolutely. And this is where it started. Rounding out World War I, Creel Commission, CPI propaganda. Next, entering the chat. I mean, we have to have it. The Espionage Act of 1917. This censored idea is critical of the war effort. But they didn't end there. In 1918, they had the Sedition Act. How lovely. This made any criticism of Wilson's administration illegal. And we hear stories of the Sedition Act being employed today.
We do. And one quick thing I wanted to point out on the Espionage Act, my newspaper article is a little bit difficult to read, but I highlighted it and put it in here because thought it was funny. This guy was Louis B. Nagler was he was charged, and the article says he is charged among other things with referring to the Red Cross as a bunch of grafters and attacking the YMCA work or war work. YMCA war work. And I thought that was very funny because this is often, a lot of people refer to certain people or organizations as grifters. And this guy was kind of an OG. Honestly, he should be a hero because he was exercising his First Amendment right to free speech. And this goes to another thing. A lot of people are like, well, when was it over? When was it game over? I don't know. I don't have the answer for that, but I would say that a case could be made that perhaps it was maybe over from the start. Maybe it was over whenever the United States government decided to attack a group of states that peacefully agreed to leave. Or it could have been over whenever the government not only manufactures consent, but then they come up with new laws to put Americans in jail. And this was in 1918, and convict them and charge them, arrest them, all of these things for speaking out, for using the First Amendment. So these things have always been under attack. Like, it feels worse sometimes in today's day and time, but here's an example of a guy calling the Red Cross a bunch of grafters, and he literally was charged for that.
Well, we'll give him way to go, Mr. Nagler.
Love it.
Love it. So, rounding off World War I and CPI, these and more tactics by the CPI brought about the new public relations, appeals to the heart, emotion, and instead of fact, the head. The progressive flip-flop during wartime was very evident. The progressives were made to want war. Public opinion and public mind can be managed and manufactured. And these were the take-home points by the movers and shakers, by the social elite, by the social engineers of America. Now we'll move away from World War I. Next section in the book, the author has titled it Social Psychology and the Quest for the Public Mind. Now, we're going to give a little Ivy Lee quote, and then I'll get into what else the author means by the quest for the public mind. Publicity is essentially a matter of mass psychology. We must remember that people are guided more by sentiment than by mind. Remember, people are being guided by emotion now. You must study human emotions and all the factors that move people, that persuade men in any line of human activity. Psychology, mob psychology, is one of the more important factors that underlay this whole business. Public relations, as Ivy Lee declared in 1923, was nothing less than, quote, the art of steering heads inside, the secret art of all other arts, the secret religion of all religions. Ivy Lee, you evildoer.
Yeah, and I have in my notes, Sean, that is that sounds like black magic to me, or dark magic, or a spell, or sorcery. That is
It,
that is the image that was evoked for me in reading that quote.
it really is. Absolutely. It is it's quite dark. Poison Ivy Lee. I call him poison. He's poison. Bad,
And
bad hombre.
the other thing that I want to say really quick before you get into this, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But the another great young orator, when he was young at the time, was Ben Shapiro. And like him or hate him, whatever you want to say, he has a way with words. He's a good speaker. And he says something that is quite famous if you're familiar with his work. And he said, "Oh, facts don't care about your feelings." But actually, based on this book and what we're getting ready to talk about, feelings don't care about your facts.
Damn, well said. Look at you. Everyone said you weren't smart, Ashley, but I think they're wrong.
Cool it.
All right, you've showed on the screen here in your presentation a picture of Robert Ezra Clark. He enters the chat next. He studied crowd psychology. According to Robert Ezra Park, public opinion is generally nothing more than a naive collective impulse which can be manipulated by catchwords. Modern journalism is a mechanism for controlling the collective attention. There's a key phrases in there. Let's move to the next evildoer. Wilfred Trotter, another influential early social engineer. He wrote a pivotal 1916 book titled The Instincts of the Herd in Peace and War. And Trotter focused on the herd's unconsciousness, the instinctual drives that can be manipulated. Remember, we said this about the idea from Bernays of democracy, that the using the instincts or the base desires is what drives democracy. Because if you gauge your campaign on a base desire, you just need 50% or one more than 50% to vote for it for a democracy manipulation. Everett Dean Martin's influential 1919 book furthered this emphasis into instinctual impulses into crowd activity. Hopefully you all get where I'm going with this. Now entering the chat, you know him, you love him, Sigmund Freud, the double uncle of Edward Bernays. His 1922 study, titled Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, was heavily passed around public relations circles. Freud brought the irrational thinking of the crowd or the public back to the individual. So they're manipulating the crowds, are looking to manipulate the crowds, and studying crowd and group think. Freud took it back a step and said, we may be able to use these tactics on the individual itself. Keep in mind, governments, elites, war profiteers, ad agencies are all learning from these works. We didn't go deep into Freud's or Trotter's or Ezra Park's work. You got a little taste on your palate of them. You can read about them on your own, but the quote unquote elites, the cryptocracy, was studying their works heavily and learning from them. Next, the author goes back to Gustave Le Bon, that SOB. His writings were a warning against allowing a member of the crowd from ever governing anyone. So this is an elitist wet dream. Le Bon pushed the idea that the crowd thinks in images and not words. Images can be manipulated. He wrote specifically of the need to employ mass hypnosis. And I'll read to you what he says about it.
And while Sean's getting there, I just want to point out that this is especially with Freud and with the discussion of mass hypnosis. This is where we really are going to be able to tie in or continue weaving these threads into some of the other more specific or more well-known manipulation techniques, and hopefully some not as well known manipulation techniques from intelligentsia, but you better believe that these people and their ideas were very important for programs such as MK Ultra, of checking, all these many scenarios where they're checking the human reaction, and the idea of hypnosis, and then how that could even be being deployed on us to this day. For example, blue light, does that have a hypnotizing effect? I don't know. Maybe we're going to, like maybe that'll be something that we get into and cover. But just to say that this is really where we can see the easy branching into intelligentsia from people like Freud, and certainly Bernays and a lot of these other people. But this really is eliciting images of MK Ultra and behavioral control on a mass scale that could be used and employed by a government for me.
Precisely. The author writes that within this analysis of the crowd's thirst for illusions lay prescriptions for the modern exercise of power. Throughout history, Le Bon professed, civilization had always been created and directed by a small intellectual aristocracy, never by crowds. Now, in an era in which the voice of the masses was preponderant, this aristocracy of social scientists must explore the crowd mind to develop techniques by which mass hypnosis might be employed. Oh, mass hypnosis. So, according to Bernays, Trotter, Le Bon, the people we've just covered, and others, they need to restore the aristocracy, and they all say the same goddamn lines, that instincts are a menace and that they want to be the stewards of civilization. This aristocracy, this cryptocracy, the technocrats, the elite class, the billionaires, they believe they are the stewards of civilization and that we are the cannon fodder. We are too stupid, too chaotic, and we need to be quelled. We need to be controlled. They're all saying the same damn thing. And they keep stressing the importance of symbols. So, moving on to, I think this is the final section that we'll cover before we call it quits for the night. And we pick this up in part 2 because we're going to be covering this book
only once, but twice.
Very well done.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks, GW. Chapter 8 that we will give you a quick summary on is titled The Unseen Engineers, Biography of an Idea. And I'll quote the author in the beginning. He says, by the early 1920s, the pragmatic lessons of the war, coupled with the prevailing wisdom of social psychology, had moved a growing sector of the American intelligentsia into two conclusions. First was the belief that a modern large-scale society, such as the United States, required the services of a corps of experts, people who specialized in the analysis and management of public opinion. Second was the conviction that these unseen engineers, as Harold Laswell called them, were dealing with a fundamentally illogical public and therefore must learn to identify and master those techniques of communication that would have the most compelling effect on public attitudes and thinking. Back to Walter Lippmann. He said, quote, we don't see, then define. We define first and then see. Ergo, this is Sean speaking, this is why they change definitions so often, to manipulate how things are seen. Because it is true. We define first and then we see. Also with Walter Lippmann, he was writing at the time, early 1920s, about how they are the scientific elite class, the stewards of civilization. And generally, people are too irrational to be able to handle democracy themselves. Cognitive engineering was needed, he says. Political science will frame opinions for the press. This was the primary aim of being in the perception management business. Propaganda needs censorship to be effective, he said. He's basically describing memes, pictures, images that call up our own pictures, images, thoughts, and ideas related to an emotion, of course, in our memories. Does that make sense how I describe that, Ashley?
Yes.
Absolutely. Cool.
Yes.
Also from Walter Lippmann, he said, man doesn't have the time to rationalize, so symbols shall be used to shortcut or short circuit the inconvenience of time for critical reason. Symbols magnify emotion while undermining critical thought. This is the advent of the symbol used for manipulation. Not that it wasn't before, but in the mass media era, this was huge. Now, before we go to a little exercise, do you have a comment, Ashley? Or are you ready to rock and roll?
Well, I just wanted to say that, yeah, this was the hacking and this was like the amalgamation of many of these ideas. So it was, that was also a change, right? Is that, yes, these techniques were employed probably as one off, but this was when really they had an opportunity to trial it on a huge scale and continue to hone in on exactly what worked. And then the last thing I want to add is that him making the comment about people don't have time, I would say that that tracks with a system that is designed to deliberately keep the tax cattle busy with, you know, whether that's toiling away all day at a job, whether that's struggling to get by because your dollar doesn't go as far as it used to, or any number of these things for why people wouldn't have time. Or if that is also, this is where bread and circuses enters the chat. This is where doom scrolling enters the chat. This is where binge watching enters the chat, because and this is not a judgment, I do all of those things, but I'm just saying, like, these are the things that are used to keep people busy, and for us to be too busy to be intellectual, or however he phrased that. So it's almost like some group of people had an interest in keeping the everyday person very busy.
So true. Keep them constant consumers looking for the next piece of dopamine hit. Don't let them focus too much. Give them more distraction. And if you get them asking the wrong questions, you don't care what answers they come up with. So lead them down the wrong path. Manipulate the sheeple. Good
There you
point.
go.
So before we show the next picture, hopefully y'all are watching, but we'll describe it. If you are just going old-fashioned audio, I'm going to read something that's in the book. Of course, I always reading from the book, Sean. Well, this has a very specific point to it. Globally, very specific people were learning, and specific governments were learning about these social engineering public relations tactics, specifically about the power of symbols that's being written about by these social engineers and social psychologists. So in the book, it says, by the 1920s, a growing number of politicians and political strategists were embracing the idea that calculating constructed images could be used as tools for galvanizing popular passions. A telling example, if this assumption a telling example is this assumption that occurred in 1927 when a 1927 when a soon to be famous politician visited a photographer's studio to have a series of portraits made. This was not a conventional sitting, however. These photos were taken as the politician stood boldly before the camera, rehearsing grandly dramatic gestures as he lip synced to a recording of one of his own speeches. Later, he would study the pictures with great care, seeking to perfect the visual impact of his oratorical presence. I quizzed you on this a year ago when I read this book and we first started discussing it, and you got the person right. Are you ready for the big reveal for the audience?
I'm ready for the big reveal. And I would say, could you provide them with a hint or two? I have a hint ready.
Go ahead with your hint.
I would say the first one would be Austrian, and the second would be painter.
I'll give, this is a little obscure. This may not be for everybody, but I'll say Argentina.
Okay. All right. Are you ready?
I'm ready. 3, 2, 1. Lay it on me. That's right. Not friend of the show, Hitler. That's it.
Not a friend of the show, but definitely check out the images, because I agree with Sean that they are very powerful, very interesting, and these are unique. These are not pictures that I have seen really in association with him.
Yeah, everyone, you always hear about his masterful oratorical experiences for the German people, but I don't understand German except for, the very basics, Gesundheit. So these pictures really, really speak 1,000 words, because now that I know the backstory, that he went to a private photographer, lip synced his own speech, gave the most dramatic poses and facial expressions he could, and then studied those to repeat it to the audience. And these pictures are what were used in newspapers, in magazines, to bring him to power, because he was not a nobody, but essentially a nobody at this time. This was before his rise to power. This is 1927 Germany. Pretty incredible.
It really is incredible, and it goes to show this is somebody who's trialing, and they are working on using imagery specifically, because he had a very specific look as well. He had very specific facial expressions. He was using imagery as well, the imagery paired with the sound, in order to really cultivate something that was very memorable and stuck with people, and then of course would go on to be very influential. So this is a really interesting case, and it's a peek behind the curtain. This is a peek behind how do other people who are excellent orators at a young age, how does that happen? Surely there's natural charisma and natural talent there, but maybe this is, if they are chosen from some institution in order to do this, then perhaps this is the kind of training that they go through, as well as lip syncing to themselves or re-listening to what they have said over and over and over. I'm sure that's part of it.
Yeah, you do this all the time, don't you?
I try.
You try.
I'm still working on it.
Don't worry. We'll tell everyone you're Austrian and you're moving to Germany to rile up some fervor.
No.
Just
No,
kidding.
no.
Just kidding. So, moving on from Hitler now. Now we've reached the pinnacle of the end of part 1. It's a little bit of a detour for a moment, but the author brings up the feud, and this really brings up, it describes the elitist, aristocratic mentality of Edward Bernays specifically. It's the Edward Bernays versus Walter Lippmann feud. Bernays was not a fan of Lippmann. He respected him, but claimed he was way too academic to be useful. Strong words from Bernays. He claimed that Lippmann could talk the talk, but could not walk the walk. That Lippmann was, he claimed Lippmann was not one to apply these tactics to the world, was basically just a writer of them. Bernays, on the other hand, actually worked in the industry, manipulating the minds of people for various companies and organizations throughout his life and into his 90s. So he claims he was walking the walk. Going back in history, Bernays after graduating from Cornell in 1913, was applying his tactics as a journalist, then an editor of 2 medical magazines, then a press agent for a controversial theater play before becoming a full-time consultant and publicist. Following World War I, he spoke of the war propaganda he witnessed as being very successful and that we must continue to organize the chaos. By the way, he was editor for 2 medical magazines, made his connections, and then there was a very controversial theater play that had to do with some guy having syphilis and then deciding to get married and have a child with a woman that also had syphilis, and it was really controversial and people didn't even want it in theaters. But he took his contacts from the medical magazines and took Flexner, you might remember that name, and some other high-ranking doctors, popular celebrity doctors basically of the time, and had them promote the play as medically accurate. So another appeal to authority perfected by Edward Bernays.
And if I could just say really quickly, Sean, I find it weird the obsession with the predator class and syphilis. Yes, I know that very famous people succumb to syphilis, but this was also part of these experiments done on humans against their will was involving syphilis. Obviously, there's the very famous Tuskegee experiment where black men who had syphilis were supposed to be getting treatment. They believed that they were getting treatment. They did not receive treatment. And then syphilis was also used in other situations, experiments on people in regarding the not exactly the eugenicist movement that we plan on covering at some point, but in experiments on vulnerable people. Now that doesn't really have anything to do with what you're talking about, but I just find it weird.
I agree. Just making a note to myself. My apologies. But I totally agree with you. Very weird. What is this obsession with syphilis? The clap. Everyone's got it.
Avoid the clap.
Avoid the clap. The feud continues in 1922 between Lippmann and Bernays. In 1922, Walter Lippmann published Public Opinion. Recommend everyone read it. A year later, 1923, Bernays, of course, published a book calling it Crystallizing Public Opinion, probably his better propaganda book of the 2 main propaganda books. A lot of public polling manipulation in that book. We will be covering it in the future. After which, in 1927, Walter Lippmann published the Phantom Public. 1 year later, again, Bernays punches back with a left hook and publishes Propaganda, the famous propaganda book, which we will cover. Why not? Bernays, the big fan of appeal to authority usage. He used this with his theater plays. He used it with the pork and bacon industry when he got doctors to promote pork and bacon as being a great source of breakfast energy. It brought bacon back to the breakfast table. I'm going to read to you a quote from him. He says, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses has become an indispensable feature of the democratic society. With the masses pounding at the doors of the higher strata of society, ruling elites are turning to propaganda as the scientifically informed tool through which public submission might be achieved." Of course it is. That quote is really repeating what we're hearing again and again and again and again with these quote unquote elites, but you should get the point by now. They are the stewards of civilization. They are to quell the public. They are to quiet the masses. They are to steer the minds and the souls and the hearts of the masses. And It is only this scientific elite class that can do it. It is only them. By this point, in the late 19 teens, or going back to the late 19 teens, he laid out an outline for how a professional PR specialist can become a creator of influence, as he called it. And I'll read it to you. This is his outline for the creator of circumstance. Number one, be a careful student of media and news media. Number two, be sociologically and anthropologically informed. Be students of social structure and cultural routines. Understand existing networks of leadership. Understand ongoing monitors of social attitudes. Number three, be a watchful student of the psyche, individual and mass psychology. Psychological habits are critical. That is his guideline for creating the perfect public relation propaganda specialist. And reading those, that sounds like exactly what CIA training would have you do. Does it not?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And so this is where, so many of these ideas overlap with, or at least potentially, some of this is speculation, some of it is out of a playbook, but this is a lot of weaving in these similar ideas into that particular tapestry.
Absolutely. According to Bernays, news is reality distilled down to its most simplified and dramatized form, which can appeal to the instincts of the public mind. The creation of news is the essential job of the Public Relations Council. Bernays saw the symbol, again, the symbol as the most powerful psychological megaphone for reaching and persuading the public. He called these the reflex images. This symbol or meme can reach large numbers of people at once in the shortest possible time. Now, we've reached our conclusion. Now we adjust our vision and we turn to a world that's turning away from the word and instead looking toward the image, ruled by a new intellectual aristocracy with an arsenal of applied social scientific methods. The symbol, and we'll continue the rest in part two, but the symbol, I'm thinking, has there been any symbols, maybe simple symbols that we've seen that have a lot of emotion and meaning behind them, we've seen on people's online profiles anytime recently? Maybe one in the shape of a flag that has specific designs or colors on them. Those are memes. Those are symbols. Those are portraying an emotion in the person who perceives that symbol. It's saying, I'm part of this class. I believe in this. It's also saying, believe this too. And Bernays was
100%.
right.
Yep, 100%, because we saw, and this was, it's a bit outdated at this point, but during, this was just post-pandemic, and we saw the Russia-Ukraine conflict begin, and there was a lot of people that were using in some way, shape, or form some type of imagery of the blue and yellow for the
Yep.
Ukraine flag. And certainly you see this type of like reactionary mimetic, I guess, may be a good way to describe it, in almost every conflict in today's day and time. Or I remember after the incident at Charlie Hebdo in France, where people who were working at a magazine were, they were killed. And I remember people automatically like starting online, and I didn't recognize this at that time, but they were putting up, a peace symbol that somebody had hand drawn that also looked like the Eiffel Tower. it was everywhere. And of course, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but I'm just saying it's like it's the passage of a mimetic or a symbol and combining that emotion that you're talking about.
Absolutely. The flag came to mind again and again, specifically the Ukraine. People couldn't even point Ukraine on a map, and they were putting that flag on their online profiles. It was driving me crazy because they don't know shit about it. Also, what came to my mind was during the the scamdemic, the symbol of the mask, the face mask. That was enough to portray an emotion, an image, and I can't look at people wearing a face mask now and not relive part of the emotion that I went through during that absolutely atrociously horrible time. Things that happened to me personally, things I saw, things I heard, family, friends, relationships, workplace environment. It's never good when I see that. All I could think every time I see a face diaper is right. It's negative to me now, and
Right. It's like a flashback.
exactly. It's forever with me. So yes, I agree with Bernays that these symbols are incredibly powerful and can reach people and hit at the emotions where we can be most quickly manipulated.
Exactly. And that's they have study of uh all of these things that attract humans to an image, right? Placement, color, design. All of these things are very well known in order to capture the attention, in order to facilitate an emotional connection, attachment to whatever that symbol or image is associated with, whatever it's a meme for.
Right. Emotion over logic, emotion over logic, emotion over logic. That's what they're going for. That's how they're trying to manipulate us. That's really been the culmination of what they learned from in the past in this book, what they're showing us from the muckrakers to the incident at Ludlow with the Rockefellers to World War I to the battle for the mind. They're leading up to the image in the era of mass media. It was the fastest, easiest way to manipulate people, and I can't disagree with them.
Very, very good.
I know
And
I'm reiterating the same thing again and again, but it was quite powerful for me.
yeah, it really is. So, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and joining us on this first part of our look into PR, a history of social history of spin. Excuse me. We will be continuing our deep dive into this book with our part two, and just as I had said before, make sure that you let us know if you have any questions, anything you would like us to address regarding the book, as well as like, subscribe, and share our show. And until next time, signing off for myself and Sean, remember, feelings don't care about your facts. Bye bye.
Good night.